This is Marc Polymeropoulos. Oh, let's do it again. Ready? Sorry.
You're good. You're good. Hiya! There you go.
This is Marc Polymeropoulos, and you are watching the Break It Down show.
There's so many places to start, but we were just talking off mic, and I think this is always interesting. People in our line of work, the collectors, the humaniters, the counterintelligence agents, the spies, we are hard to get on a show like this. Like you and I, we do this. We're comfortable with it now. Even when I say the word, "Oh, I was a spy," our peers be like, "Oh, no, you weren't." I'm like, well, if I got arrested in any country for doing anything, what are they going to call me? They're going to try me with being a, U.S. government information person. They're going to have a very clear charge. Why do we have such a hard time telling our stories, even if we're well past the classifications? We're not about divulging secrets, but why are we so stuck on that?
Well, I mean, doing this, talking in public is anathema to an intelligence officer. Our life is in the shadows. The whole idea is not to get caught. You are often operating undercover, so you're play acting something else, whether it's some kind of civilian DoD cover or a State Department officer or something or a businessman if it's a non-official cover officer. And so ultimately the idea of even mentioning the word intelligence kind of openly is just something that is cringeworthy. Like internally, you're like your organs seize up, and then you retire. And then you realize that there are, you if you play by the rules and you get things cleared by, what the CIA calls the Publication Review Board, you can talk to the American people or internationally. And I think it's a good thing because, we have a very good story to tell. There's some heroes in our line of work. And ultimately, it's intelligence is the nation's first line of defense. And the other thing, too, is that, look, it's not guaranteed that the intelligence community is going to have the support of the American people forever. And so we got to tell the stories that make people understand what we do.
Man, that's a great point. If we don't tell these stories and display what the role is, people, I get asked all the time. I know you do too. Like, is it anything like Jason Bourne? Is it anything like James Bond? Like, not at all. But I mean, there's elements of it that are true. But yeah, and even how you approach the job and what you do, and how I approach a job and what I do, we don't vent up very well a lot of times. Because I hardly ever worked under a cover. I had to be open about what I was doing. And so I just took that to the nth degree. Like, yeah, I'm Pete. Like, are you a spy? I'm like, yes. And if I ask you a question you don't like, don't answer it. And so we had different roles to play and different ways to do it. But because we don't talk about it enough, we can't explain that a lot of what we do is, I always tell my friends, if you were to go and watch me work, you'd think I was just goofing around the whole damn day, But that's how we work. And a lot of times I talk to people, you talk to people, we build networks, we find things out, we make friends, and we got to talk about it more.
I agree. I mean, ultimately the success one has as an operations officer, how bad can I talk on this show? Can I use a profanity?
As bad as you want.
All right. So and I always just tell people, like, don't be a dick. I mean, just, don't be an asshole, because it's actually people gravitate to those who are actually nice, empathetic, who know how to listen. So don't be an ass, and you can really build those networks that what you're talking about. But and I think that actually is something that applies to when we get out of the intelligence community, just first of all your everyday life, but also if you go into the private sector, the business world, what we're doing kind of. I mean, like if I'm a jerk to you, you're never going to invite me on again. And if I'm a jerk on air right now, everyone's going to see it and say, why do I have to listen to this guy? Like, just kind of be a normal, nice human being. It's kind of a good lesson in life, I think.
Yeah, I always say, like, my avatar, if I was to pick something like that, it's like my character is Johnny Goodtime. You want to see Pete, want to meet Pete. Like, yeah, I'm from California. It's awesome there. What do you want to ask me? And, and it's a great opener, right? They're like, oh, do girls, and I swear to God, this is a common theme in the Mideast. Do girls really wear bikinis to school in California? And I'm like, yes, of course.
Yes, they do, as a matter of fact. Just in the first and third period, Then recess. Recess, it gets crazy.
Once the fog burns off, everybody comes out. Going back to this whole thing about talking about these things, we also are really hard internally on each other in terms of our own bona fides. Like, I can say to you, hey, Mark, I am an excellent tactical field agent. There's basically nobody who's going to be better than me. I'm not saying the best, but there's nobody like, I'm over the bar where you're like, God damn, dude. Yeah. Right. But most of our peers will toss that aside and be like, whatever. Because there's no thing that you can be like, but here's my trophy. There's none of those things. And we wouldn't want one anyhow, because again, we're trying to be not paid attention to, but we are bad at our own internal bona fides to understand what good looks like. And I always ask like people in our field, so I'll ask you this too: how long did it take for you to get great at doing what you did?
So two things on that. Let me just so first of all, let me answer that last question. I think I was a very good case officer kind of towards the end of my time in the field, because you just get good after doing it a lot. Right. This is not, it's a job where, everyone of course wants to get promoted and rise to the top, but experience really does matter. And so, you become a really good case officer when you've done a tour where there's a harsh counterintelligence environment going up against the Russians or the Chinese or the Syrians. And then you have to go do a conflict zone tour. So you serve in Afghanistan or Iraq. And then you do something which is like a recruiting tour. Maybe you go to Africa, where it's it's a more benign environment. You can actually really go out and try to recruit. But you need all these experiences in order to be really good in the end. And it just takes a while. But I always thought I became a much better, kind of what do you call a full performance case officer, later towards the end of my career. But let me go back to just something you said earlier, because one of the problems in our line of work, and I don't know if we talked about this when I was on before, but it's, the people that we recruit, not an agent, not a Russian, Syrian, Chinese, North Korean, but I'm talking about those who we bring into the intelligence community. The personality trait actually is a borderline sociopath narcissist. But because why is that? Well, we had to work on our own. So of course I was a member of a team in terms of a CIA station or base, but a role of a case officer is you operate on your own. You run surveillance detection routes on your own. These huge decision points to see if you're black, if you're surveillance free, that's on your own. You're in an agent meeting, really sticky situations. And so you're taught and you're kind of built up as this kind of independent actor. The problem is later on and you talk about in retirement, okay, so everybody kind of does the sniff test. Is this person kind of legit or not? But we were never kind of born or bred to be anything other than part of a zero-sum game. And this is a part of the job that I didn't like, is that there's this level of competition which is extreme. Everyone has these type A personalities, but actually because of that, sometimes we're really not that good to each other. And I did a lot of interesting things in my time, but if some people would remember me, the last day at work after 26 years, I was in the Senior Intelligence Service. I was an SIS-4. It's equivalent of a 4-star. I had 2,000 people working for me, and I wrote a note to everybody. I blasted it out to 1,000 people, and it was just the notion of, hey, we got to treat each other better, because there's this element of a zero-sum game, and it's really toxic. And that kind of bleeds into when you retire as well, and everyone's kind of, well, who's Pete? But even people I know as well that, was Mark a great case officer? And it's almost like someone can't say, yeah, he was, because somehow that's a threat. It's a ding against them. When instead, what we should be doing is, he was good and so was I, or she was good and so was I. Like, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. And that's one part of our old business. And there are great parts of it. But that's one part of it that I don't miss and I did not like, is that kind of that. But I think it's because it's that, we hire kind of borderline sociopath narcissists. That sounds terrible, by the way, but it's true.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, part of the reason
gave your listeners and viewers a lot to unpack right there, didn't I?
Well, we're gonna work on a little bit here. So you have to have some kind of sociopathic, psychopathic, those things, because when I'm eating an evil, my job, because I'm an Army guy, right? My job is to find the evilest, nastiest person I can find. Like, who is the most motherfuckingest motherfucker out there? Right. I got to make that person my friend. And when he's like, I cheated my wife, I killed my last girlfriend, I did all this money, I have sex with little boys, I'd be like, yeah, man, that sounds awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. You're the best guy ever. And you just got to eat it. And when some families like, yeah, my husband was assassinated, and they don't have all their teeth, and you see all the pain that they're going through, you got to be like, yeah, okay. And you got to just like switch off, but it's hard. But if you can't do that, if you can't hold that face, if you can't continue to advance that relationship, which requires some sociopathic psychological problem, like that is just part of if to be in the field, this is why I always say, like, there's like our puzzle solvers, our operations guys who design operations. And I'm like, I'm so glad you did that because I hate that work. But then there's the guys like us who can go out into that barbershop and walk back with something that nobody else in the entire area can get, and that requires a very special kind of person.
You got to come back with a second meeting. That's all it is.
Yeah.
A second meeting.
Yeah. The other thing too about being nicer to each other, it is true. Like, sort of my thing is if you and I are going out, we will have sniffed each other out because we're too good at that to not do it. But you would have no problem letting it be my meeting and just being there to support me or whatever. You would have no problem if I did my own meeting and vice versa. If you're like, hey, we're going out, Pete, would you come with me and take notes? Yes.
Yeah. Like you provide you can provide counter surveillance for your friends and colleagues. 100%, because that's part of the job. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And it is one of the hardest jobs in the military because from my side of things, most of what I do, only I can do it. So I have to do all the prep for the mission. I have to do the mission. I have to write the report. I have to think about it. I'm not trying to do my own analysis, but at some point I have to be the first guy doing the analysis. And I always say this all the time, 30-hour days are common when you're in a combat zone. And I know that for you guys, it's a slightly different thing because your pace of work is different than ours, but it's not any easier. Like the pile of work that I have to do just on what happens off the camp is bigger than one person. And then I got to come back and manage relationships on the camp because, as you know, if you're not relevant to the people that are making decisions, if you're not giving them a good product, if no one's reading your product, you may as well not go off the post.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then that's. And you're talking about it within the Army, and I would add that the agency is then you have an interagency environment too. So we would, for example, when I was chief of a paramilitary base in Afghanistan, so it was the CIA contingent. We had contractors, and I had a special forces, an ODA there as well. So managing all those, which and they were doing in only the weird way that we fought in Afghanistan. They were doing the exact same thing we were doing. And so, we were tripping over each other's developmentals and recruited assets. And, so there was a hell of a lot of coordination. So you're right. So managing that relationship kind of in the rear is almost as important as what you're doing out in the field as well.
Yeah. And we don't got to stay this much longer, but I do want to, just because people don't understand. For me, when I look at it, I'm balancing the equation of off the camp, on the camp. I was much more at threat on the camp, not from being shot by anybody or anything like that, but kicked out of theater, backstabbed, all that stuff. Like if I wasn't relevant to that commander and that commander didn't protect me as his truth person, because I brought bad news, man. You know how mine work is, like, hey, this ain't working, this ain't working, this ain't. Well, what is working? I don't know. Let me go back out. And you come back and you're like, and this isn't working, and this isn't working, and this, that doesn't seem, that's not playing baccarat in a casino. That gets people pissed at you because now, and you can be nice about it, but you're putting people's jobs and how they're performing on Front Street, and nobody likes that.
So just to throw one more kind of piece onto this, I'm actually giving a talk next week to it's a massive DoD conference, an anti-terrorism conference, and they kind of asked me to talk, and I'm a little bit of an outlier because I'm the former agency guy there, but my talk is on the future of the SOF-CIA relationship in kind of great power competition. And one of the things I talk about is the reason why it worked so well in the 20 years of the GWAT, the Global War on Terrorism, is that we grew up together with, my SOF counterparts. So, I remember meeting Chris Miller, who was in 5th Group in 2002, as we were going into Iraq, and later on he's acting Secretary of Defense. Same thing with, members of Naval Special Warfare and others who all, and so those relate. So the kind of the basis of my talk is relationships are key. And my worry in great power competition is that we don't have that actually side by side in conflict zones. And so we're not going to be establishing those relationships, but not to kind of diverge too much, but relationships are absolutely everything.
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to that bona fides of are you really good at this? And when Chris for 15 years, and we picked up an interpreter. It was a guy named Johnny Walker, who wrote this fantastic book, codenamed Johnny Walker. He did more SEAL missions in Iraq than any SEAL. They allow him to wear a trident on his chest, and this is an Iraqi guy that's never been to BUD/S.
Yeah.
Right. So we go, and because our job, I'm like, who on this post either collects or needs some collection done for them because I need clients. I need people to work for. And so we go over and meet the SEALs, and I don't know anybody. I mean, I really don't know anybody. And the chief in that team's like, I know you. And I'm like, no, you don't know me, man. He's like, no, I know you. Let's figure it out. So we figured it out. He went to a course I taught at that counterintelligence, force protection, source operation course. And so that gave me instant bona fides with some SEAL, right?
Yeah.
And he gave us Johnny Walker. We gave Johnny Walker back when they wanted him and everything. But that made a difference, man, because I didn't have to prove anything.
Yep.
You know.
And the other thing is, people will start calling around. You know this guy. You know this guy. I mean, your reputation is everything. Again, but that's what I worry about, is that we might lose some of that. But anyhow.
Yeah. Let's talk about Israel and Palestine. It's kind of funny. We don't call it the Israel versus Palestine war. We call it something else because it's a really complex thing. I know we have this new doc, and I want to get to that doc, but how do you characterize this particular, because Israel and Palestine go to war a lot. I mean, we don't track it here in the West the same way in the press. We just say they launched some rockets. They go, that was a war. So how do you characterize this fight?
Great question. And so, first of all, this was my neck of the woods. I did 2 tours in Jordan, a tour in Syria, in Kuwait, in Egypt, and then all my time in Iraq and Afghanistan. So this was my, I finished up my career doing kind of, Russia, Ukraine, Europe stuff. But my neck of the woods was the Middle East. And so let me just give you a vignette. So I'm on October 7th. My wife and I are in Harrisonburg, Virginia. We're watching my son play a fall college baseball game. And the phone, and I wake up at 7 a.m. and my wife and I had been out and had a couple of adult beverages the night before. I was a little fuzzy, and I look at my phone, and there's 45 missed texts. It's MSNBC calling. They said, and so I actually have a contract with them. I'm an on-air contributor. I work for them. And they said, you got to be on air in 10 minutes. And I texted back. I'm like, what happened? They said, a Hamas army just invaded Israel. And I wrote back literally saying, what the fuck? Excuse my language again. And I remember getting on air, and the first thing I said was Andrea Mitchell, famous, obviously journalist. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I said, this is Israel's 9/11. Because ultimately, when you have 1,200 Israelis killed, that's the equivalent of 40. In fact, actually, it's worse than 9/11. It's equivalent of 40,000 Americans dying in a couple hours. And so it is different than other conflicts between whether it's Israel and Hamas. In Gaza, or kind of low-level insurgencies in the West Bank, or Israel, Hezbollah, in Lebanon. And so, this was a kind of a game changer for the region. And the way I looked at it, and I thought about it, and I said a couple things. And again, this is from my time. I've worked with every service there. It's the Palestinian intelligence service. I've been to every city in the West Bank. I've been in Gaza. I've worked with the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and the Israelis extensively. And my analysis, which I think was 100% right, and it was also based on talking to some former Mossad officers I know very well. Basically, the Israelis were not going to be very nice, and they were going to go in and kill everybody, and then we're going to have to figure it out afterwards. That's not saying I'm not advocating this. I'm just saying that, and the other part too is they're not going to listen to us, regardless of what we do, because just the Israelis just don't. They're a great ally of ours, but they kind of go it their own way. I remember when I was in Syria and the Israelis bombed a nuclear reactor in northern Syria, the North Koreans were building. And guess what? We didn't want them to do it. And they said, that's nice. And one day it wasn't there anymore. And so ultimately the Israelis were going to do what they're going to. So that, the way I see it now, and then of course, what complicates things is the situation in the north, where Israel and Hezbollah are kind of going at it. So, what do you have now? You have a multi-front, almost a 6 or 7 front war. So it's Gaza, Lebanon, it's Syria, then you have Iraq. Of course, you have Yemen now with the Houthis. What am I on? 5? We're 6, and then what you kind of throw the Iranians.
Well, you throw Iran in there, yeah. I mean,
and so ultimately, it's an extraordinarily difficult conflict. I mean, and so it's an impossible situation to deal with any U.S. administration. So I think the Biden administration has done some things right and some things wrong. I think that what was interesting is the bear hug that Biden gave to the Israelis afterwards, basically giving them a green light to do anything. I think a lot of us looked at that and were like, well, we're going to own what they do, and it's not going to be pretty. Yeah. And here we are.
Yeah. Well, and I don't even know that it's gotten all the way ugly yet. You and I, again, but we both know how this works. Yes, in the Gaza Strip, it's hard fighting and war is ugly. And that is, I think in no way if that is abnormal. Like, war is nasty. By the way, the damage done doesn't stop for decades. Oh, and by the way, the minute Mossad finds one of the bagmen in whatever country and they smoke that guy, oops, wrong guy, that won't be the first time. And it's not going to be the last that they go out and do that, because they have to fight a different game than we do.
They do.
And it's going to get real uncomfortable.
Key thing also, sorry, just for your the viewers.
Yeah.
50 Americans were killed that day, and 6 Americans are still held hostage. And this from the counterterrorism world. I don't care about if it's a dual citizen or not. They have a blue passport. They are Americans. The U.S. counterterrorism world doesn't say, oh, they were living in Israel. They're Israeli citizens. They actually are American citizens. They have a blue passport, and we treat that just the same as if they were actually living in New York or Philly. So the one thing I think many people forget is 50 Americans were killed and there's 6 remaining U.S. Hostages. Right. But at the same time, there's 30,000. If you believe, I mean, the casualty figures are probably generally correct, but the civilian kind of catastrophe is real, and so this is a mess and a half. But there's the way I say this, and this, it's almost a cop out, and I admit it, but I think it's true. This, after October 7th, what has occurred was almost inevitable. And so when people say, oh, the U.S. was trying to give lectures and others that the Israelis should have showed more restraint. Okay, maybe, but if 40,000 Americans were killed on the border of Mexico, Mexico City wouldn't exist. And it's a terrible analogy, but I'm just saying, or Buffalo or Canada. I mean, 40,000 Americans killed in a couple hours. So so the inevitability of this kind of human carnage. It's I don't know. You and I were also, we're practitioners, but we're observers to some pretty bad things in life. Sometimes bad shit happens. I don't know any other scenario how it would have turned out, and it's just sad to see. And now we got to unscrew it.
But and we've tried a lot of political things, and we'll just say both sides have not done things that work towards a political solution. And so the doves had their chance. Now the hawks have to do their things, and hawks just are not gentle. They're not going to be gentle. Yeah. And by the way, if a ceasefire and a cease of operations was in play and really was going to happen, one of the ways to do that is for Hamas to surrender and give up all of the hostages. Right. They still have fight in them. So
and look, the hostage deal right now, and again, this is getting into kind of the day-to-day details, but the talks in Cairo have fallen apart because Hamas is not willing to play ball. So while the U.S. desperately wants a ceasefire, the international community does. Certainly the Palestinian people who are suffering, but Hamas, who don't care about the Palestinian people, are refusing a ceasefire, and so it's it's going to be some kind of troubling days and weeks ahead, and then throw in on top of that, and one of the fun things about doing a podcast like this is I can actually talk about this other than a 30-second soundbite on TV. Right. But the Israeli political dynamics are really insane as well, where you have a wildly unpopular prime minister who, the second the war ends, will be removed from office. But you have Israeli opposition figures like the defense minister, Gallant and Benny Gantz, who actually support continuing the war. So this hatred of Netanyahu, which is totally justified in many accounts, what people don't seem to realize is that if a new Israeli government comes, they're not stopping. And they're not stopping. Or as my friends from Mossad say, take the ceasefire for 6 weeks. We're not stopping. We're not stopping. We're going to hunt everybody down. So the idea that there's this radical Israeli camp and a peace camp is misunderstanding the Israeli political dynamic, where my friends in Israel from the left even don't want to talk about a 2-state solution. They don't want to talk about stopping the war.
That's not on the table anymore. Yeah.
And so, and by the way, when I talk about stuff like this, I have so many friends in the Arab world who are so pissed at me because they think I'm being a hawkish. I'm just calling it the way I see it. That's all.
Yeah. I'd like there to be a ceasefire and people not dying legitimately. However, I see the pressure going in one direction. I don't see the pressure going in the other direction towards Hamas being like, hey, knock it off and we'll get a ceasefire. But they don't want to knock it off. And so that's fine. You guys got to sort out who's going to impose will on the other, and we'll keep trying, right? But the pressure you see on the TV is towards the Israelis, that they are some kind of monsters. But again, Hamas is is not giving that up. You said something else too about, well, first off, the 30-second thing. Like, this fight is so complex. I don't know if everybody understands that Iran funds Sunnis. Sunnis typically go towards the Saudi Arabia way. They fund Sunnis to do their proxy war for them. And then and Saudi Arabia is like, we don't even know these people. And so like it swirls around. It's so crazy over there and complex. You can't do it in 30 minutes. And you are 100% right. And Golda Meir said this a long time ago, back when she was the boss lady. It's like, we have been attacked every year that we've been a nation. We will not lose one single fight. That is their standard.
Yeah.
And they have different stakes than we do. And when you see, whether you take it seriously or not, when you see what the Iranian leaders say on X, and they talk about the annihilation of the Jewish state, they get to believe that, and they get to come out and they get to hit people in the face because they've been threatened, and they're like, we believe you, let's fight, and now there's a chance to clean house.
Give you a great example of how about kind of geography. So I live in Vienna, Virginia. It's a suburb outside of DC, about 15 miles. This is the equivalent of if Hamas controlled Washington, D.C. It's 15 miles away. It's not across the pond. America has this, we have this luxury of having an ocean, separating us from conflict. This is the next town over. That, a kind of a 3,000 man army attacked us and brutally kind of raped and murdered and mutilated, 1,200 Israelis. So super complicated. Yeah. One last kind of piece on this, I think, just for folks which I find so interesting, is that, again, everything is not as it seems. The intelligence cooperation that is still going on between Israel and Jordan, Israel and Egypt, Israel and Saudi Arabia, that has not changed. The Egyptians and the Jordanians despise Hamas. And I'll just kind of give a snippet. A journalist, a friend of mine who was talking to the Jordanian intelligence, this is maybe a month or two ago, said, when he asked the Jordanians, what do you think of this? This is Jordanian intelligence. He said, keep going, meaning they want Israel to keep going. Now, of course, that's not the public stance of the Jordanian, Egyptian, or Saudi governments. But under the table, in the intelligence sphere, where everything matters in the Middle East, much more so, and then on the diplomatic level, these countries, while of course they're worried internally for their own stability because people in their countries are pissed at the Israelis, furious, of course, but ultimately the intelligence services in some ways want Israel to succeed and destroy Hamas. Just another kind of fascinating aspect of this.
Yeah, well, and that also, and I don't know who gets the win for this, but the fact that Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia are all cooperating with the United States and in some ways supporting Israel, that is a credit to someone. I don't know if it's Kissinger or whoever it's going to be, if there's even one person, but to withstand this much struggle, and Jordan and Israel fighting is completely not even like imaginable. Same thing with Egypt. That wasn't the case at least I don't know how old you are, at least in my lifetime. That wasn't the case. That happened, later on. That's remarkable partnership between these elements, and it does show that the region can work together. And dare I say it, the Abraham Accords were advancing that potentially. We didn't get to see the end of that work. Maybe it's all for naught now. Who knows? But there is indications that we're going in the good direction. It's just ponderous and slow and everything else. But I don't know. You're the expert in that area. What do you think?
Sure. So a couple things. So, in a nice kind of neat, wonderful world, yes. But you have an Israeli government that won't cooperate right now with Netanyahu. And so there's a deal on the table for Saudi normalization. But it's going to take the creation of a Palestinian state, or at least even steps towards it. And, Netanyahu and his kind of extreme right coalition, don't believe in that. And so that's a problem. But I think essentially, if you can, make lemonade out of lemons. I mean, there is something to come out of this potentially useful. We would have to see the Israeli government fall and a new Israeli government, and they have to, stop things like, building West Bank settlements. I mean, there's some pieces of this, but you're right in the sense that, the Saudis are actually committed to this idea of a normalization agreement, but you have to see some changes in Israeli behavior. Particularly in the West Bank with settlements, and then kind of in winding down the conflict. And so, we'll see. Again, it's one of the things that when I was, I remember, the CIA was involved in the peace process in the late 90s. And George Tenet used to kind of tell us, a former CIA director, said that, the process does matter, even if there's not progress. You have to have all sides keep talking. So as long as this kind of still is swirling around, that there's a potential deal down the road. But I think you're right. It's just going to take some more time. We're not there yet. Not even close, actually.
Yeah. I'm curious what your thoughts are on. So it's easy to bash Netanyahu. Real simple to do that, and he deserves a lot of that. But it's also true that he is the guy that's been prime minister the most in the last 30 years in Israel, and it's not even close. He spends a lot of time running that country, and he can point at results and go, like any politician can, he'd be like, I did that. And it's a lot of good stuff. I mean, they've become an innovator in the world, entrepreneur in the world. No one is better at that than Israel. So there's a lot of things that he gets credit for, and he keeps getting elected. So when does the politics stop and the other stuff start? Because there is a right-left battle there where he takes a lot of hits, but that doesn't mean he's a bad leader. So I don't know. Help me sort out like where the politics and the other stuff happen, because it's not clear to me.
So I think Netanyahu has changed over time, and he has obviously tilted much more to the right. That the only coalition he could build is with some kind of extreme right parties, and so. I think his legacy really is going to be tainted because of a variety of things, but really October 7th. Ultimately, it was on his watch where kind of the greatest intelligence catastrophe in the history of Israel occurred. And so, that's just a fact. One point, though, that I think that deserves to be, and because he's tilted so far to the right, he does not believe in a two-state solution. They're expanding settlements on the West Bank. I think that when I talk to some Israeli friends, they say something that's actually really interesting. They said the biggest crisis in Israel right now is the fact, and hear me out here, that they have lost the kind of young Americans, not only young American Jews, but young Americans, because all that someone who's 25-year-old in America knows is Benjamin Netanyahu as prime minister. Now the rest of us who actually know about kind of the magic of Israel. And you said it, this incredible high-tech sector. I mean, really innovative. I mean, if you go to Tel Aviv, right. It's a California beach town. It's a lot of fun. And so, but the kind of this support for Israel and this David versus Goliath story is changed. And I think, when I talked to one Israeli commentator, and he said that they're starting to understand that is a serious problem. Because of the billions that we give them in military assistance, and the U.S. being such a reliable ally. So I think, look, at the end of the day, the next Israeli government, may actually still do some things that a lot of the world is not thrilled with, like continue the war. But I think that it'll be good for Israel when Netanyahu goes, and he's going to have a very mixed legacy. But really, October 7th tarnished that in a pretty dramatic fashion. And look, I mean, if you're in charge, you're responsible. And we talked about this last time I was on. That's leadership. And that commission, there's two commissions going on in Israel right now. One run by the military, and that's started kind of their after action. And then there's going to be an independent commission. And that's going to be so interesting to see what actually happened. Yeah. How did they miss a 3,000 person army planning an invasion that took probably a year of rehearsal and prep? That's going to be pretty staggering, but it's on the prime minister's watch. I will say though that already the heads of the intelligence services said that they will resign after this. The Shin Bet director, the head of Israeli military intelligence, they have accepted responsibility. Netanyahu is not.
Yeah. We have a lot of people that accept responsibility. Heck, our Secretary of Defense said that the other day. But they stay there. It's like, I accept responsibility. Like, well, then see yourself out the door.
I know. I had a problem with that. I really did. I don't know. If I kind of took off from the agency for a couple of days, didn't tell anyone where I was. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I'd have a job after that. But anyhow.
Yeah, I'm not against the guy. I'm just saying that when you repeatedly say, I don't know how many Americans are in that country, nor can I protect them. If you've done that 3 times while you're Secretary of Defense, you've got a problem. And then you don't show up to work and you give me what amounts to an E4 excuse. Man,
I didn't like that.
We don't have that kind of accountability.
Yeah, no, I agree. And and accountability is actually critically important. And then, there's also the notion of almost trying to throw your staff under the bus too. And I don't know. I didn't like any of that. I'm surprised he didn't resign. Biden could have fired him. But I think just this is just totally me in the kind of leadership realm. He should have resigned. That was pretty dramatic. But I guess it's a notion of in this divided country, I don't know if they could get anyone confirmed again. Maybe that's why I didn't do it.
You know what? That's legit. That's legit. Yeah. And I'm not just throwing shade at Secretary Austin, because we've had 3 of the major presidential candidates have significant problems securing classified. And there's a lot of excuses on why people are being held accountable. But if you or I did that, good night, done. And so we haven't held ourselves accountable, which to me exposes us to folks like us who are adversarial towards the United States, and be like, all you got to do is give me some money and some time and get me to DC, and I'm going to gather career defining intel. Obviously this is not a US person speaking. This would be someone from somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
We have a problem holding ourselves accountable, man.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's, it does go, you think, and so I never was a part of the dissemination process of intelligence. That's done at our headquarters. Obviously there's finished analytic products, but what I was doing and you were doing is ensuring our sources that we would keep them safe. And so this is problematic when this stuff is splashed all over the world. And I don't care who did it, because that kind of, how do you recruit as a case officer if our secrets are not, kept secure? Because that's part of the pitch. It's, you will never be exposed. We have the most tightly held, processes. Well, not really.
Have you seen my Corvette?
No, I mean,
have you been to my shitter?
It's damaging, because again, that's part of, obviously when you recruit someone, there's all their motivations and, that kind of the classic, whatever it is, money, ideology, coercion, what is it? Ego, mice that everybody uses. But part of that whole shtick afterwards, an even bigger part is we're going to keep you safe. I remember, I clearly remember. I have so many great stories from the time, from my time as a case officer. And this wasn't even me, but I remember in a station where I was working, it wasn't a walk-in, but a hard target approached one of our officers at a diplomatic reception, and we ended up recruiting this individual. And in the kind of the debriefs in the beginning, and he said, well, the case officer said, why'd you choose? Why'd you come up to me? And the hard target, the asset, the hard target official said, well, I knew every one of their other clown folks from the station. They were glad handling, type A, life of the party, blah, blah, blah. They were running around chasing every hard target. He goes, but I looked at you and I knew you would keep me safe because you kind of were sitting in the background. And he goes, but I know you're going to keep me alive. I thought that was incredible. Because so someone decides to make that big jump, they have a motivation to do so. We can go into all the reasons why, but you know what? The other aspect is got to run them securely. They got to wake up in the morning and if you have kind of these document spills, that doesn't help.
Yeah. Well, let me plug what you're doing right now. So right down below is the link. It's a little bit long, but you can look for Marc's, and also you can just type in Marc's name and podcast and it's going to come up. But he's got a great new show and he talks to people who do this kind of work and it's fantastic. So I definitely recommend you guys check it out. But there's the link down below, Apple Podcasts or wherever you find podcasts. That show will be available, and tell us a little bit about it so we can plug that. But then we're going to move on to recruiting.
So it's called the Above Average Intelligence Podcast. It's kind of a funny name. It's with the Deep State Radio, the Deep State Radio Network. So ultimately, it's kind of it's one of several shows that are put out every day by David Rothkopf. He formerly was writing for the Daily Beast. He was on the Council of Foreign Relations. He was a administration official, back in the day. And he called me one day and he said, hey, do you want to do an Intel podcast? And basically I said, can I just get my friends to come on and we kind of shoot the shit? And he said, sure. That's what it is. So it's a lot of fun. I make fun of myself all the time. We talk about all of my weird kind of likes, whether it's, heavy metal and going to Metallica concerts, or my love of the Boston Red Sox, but ultimately we'll talk serious stuff about the intelligence business. And so, I've had, guests who have, served all over the planet. Can't do anyone who's active, of course, but if someone retires, I try to grab them. Next week I'm going to have the one of my great friends who's former head of our Russia house. That'll be super interesting. But even last week we had on Adam Entus from the New York Times, who just wrote kind of this huge expose of CIA operations in Ukraine over the last 10 years. And it was really cool because he was great reporting. He talked to mostly Ukrainians, but ultimately he's talking about my friends who were there and kind of describing them. And I can't say yes or no, but it was a lot of fun. But anyway, this is fun. It's a 40 minutes once a week, comes out on Mondays. So check it out.
We've got this. Definitely, everybody go check that out. I mean, that sounds incredible. Like, I want to go listen to it. The thing I want to ask you about now is this new port that's just been announced. That's going to allow us to get aid into Hamas. And one of the problems is accessibility. We got my buddy Scott is going to come on. We're going to talk some more about that in a couple of days. But that is, it's unsettling for a lot of people. And I know that you're looked in your for it and everything. So let me just say from this side, there are people that are very nervous about this. Now, I'm Pete. I'm a counterintelligence guy. I'm like, oh, I can't wait. Can we have Americans there? Because I need to flip some people, right? Like, I'm going to go out and be working because that's what I need access. That's great access for me. Dangerous, well, whatever. That's our job. So there is another side of this thing, though, to say, why are we doing this? You know, is this politically driven, right? Because we got an election coming up here in a few months. So what are your thoughts on, I guess I want you to give me the good, but I also want you to give me your concerns about this port.
So the answer is yes, of course it's politically driven. I mean, you know, so is everything. Right. I mean, you know, look, Biden's in big trouble in Michigan. So we, you know, that said, there also is a humanitarian disaster in North Gaza. There is a famine. Yeah. You know, and again, I have so many contacts in the region. And so, you know, what's happening there, you know, cannot stand. And I think what you saw the other day with the stampede and the death of 100 Palestinians, and it doesn't even matter what happened, whether Israeli forces open fire or not, doesn't matter. There's 100 dead, you know, civilians. And so I think this is, you know, obviously we started with the airdrops, and now there's the idea of this, this kind of maritime operation. And I'm good with it, and I know some details about it. But it's you know, it's the U.S. Navy is involved, but there will be no boots on the ground. They will not come ashore. In essence, they're going to be floating docks. It's going to be run out of Cyprus, and ultimately the Israelis will do inspections there of kind of the humanitarian aid coming in, and then the UN is going to take over in terms of on the ground. So there is no U.S. military on the ground. They're going to be offshore. And by the way, this is going to help. It's going to take several weeks, but it's going to help. And again, this is not, you know, the cynic says, well, we are bankrolling the destruction of a country and then we're rebuilding it, or then we're helping save the people as well. But actually, that's what we do. I mean, you know, so at the end of, you know, in war zones, when we, you know, and you know, no one really wants to talk about Iraq or Afghanistan, but, you know, we killed a lot of people there, including civilians, and then we also helped rebuild. That's actually the right thing to do. The danger, of course, is force protection. The U.S. Navy will have some assets offshore, and I think there's certainly. I mean, the nightmare scenario is a HKIA again, which I'm talking about Hamid Karzai Airport, where we lost 13 service men and women in trying to pull out Afghans at the end of the war in Afghanistan. So. I think it's the right thing for the administration to do. I think these people know what they're doing. There are some dangers, but I think that we have to be careful of the narrative, the soundbite that there's U.S. boots on the ground in Gaza. They're not, and I think they're going to be offshore. And there's a lot of sensitivities on that. But you know, you can't let a million people starve.
Yeah. It's for sure a thing nowadays that you get to say we don't want to have boots on the ground. It's also for sure a thing that we fucking have boots on the ground. And I'm not saying anything specific about Israel, but you and I both know, like, you pick a country and there's Americans on the ground in that country. There's Americans in Yemen. There's probably Americans in Israel, but they're everywhere, right? And so when we say that, it's always full of shit, at least a little bit. And so how do we know that? I'm going to be real tough right now in this current administration. They asked for the job. They got it. They get the tough things. They don't have a great track record over the last 25 years, right? They don't. These people that have come up. And some of these people are part of the system as a state, and they've made a lot of bad calls. So I'll speak for Pete. I don't trust them. I don't trust that they've gotten better at this. I know it's exceptionally hard. And sometimes the thing you make today turns into a great thing 20 years from now. But Mark, I don't trust. I don't care who's in charge on top. I don't trust the people that have made so many mistakes.
So I hear you. So there, we can put different. I see you're wearing a Dodgers hat. You can put different hats on. You put we put the hat on we're talking about now, which is armchair quarterbacking, which is what we do. And we're talking about policy stuff. We're talking about big picture stuff. What should the U.S. do?
Yeah.
And then and so I think that in many ways, right, the U.S. has made a lot of mistakes in the region, in the Middle East. We stayed too long in Afghanistan, although I don't think we should have pulled out entirely, but we obviously drifted into kind of nation building. Iraq was a mess, obviously based on false premise with WMD, and essentially we turned it into an Iranian client state. So that's not really great. But there are problems with what we've done in the Middle East now, and so the idea of looking at our political leaders now and say, are they going to be any better? I mean, you hope they are, but you're right, maybe they're not. Put the other hat on though, the operator hat.
Yeah.
I don't care if I'm sitting in my old job at CIA, I want to be there right now. Don't care. But that's just Iraq, Afghanistan, sign me up. Yemen, let's go. Ukraine.
Yeah, Ukraine. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I want to go work. I want to go flip people. I want to get in the town.
Yeah. So I mean, Ukraine, there is USG presence on the ground. I would say that or as one of my friends said, the combatant command is Langley, not UCOM. And I think that one of my former military friends at UCOM get really pissed when I say that. but that's just based on U.S. policy of no boots on the ground military. But ultimately, look. So put the operator hat back on. Like sign me up. Let's go. As screwed up as our policymakers may be, and that's just what we do. Hey, right now, the National Command Authority has decided that we're going to do this. We're going to do this floating dock port. How can I help? Even and it's the same thing in Ukraine, same anywhere else. I mean, that's kind of the nature of the people that we are. As screwed up as the policy may be, you're going. I mean, I wanted to go to Iraq. I wanted to go to Afghanistan. And I went back several times. And so that's just, it doesn't matter. So that's the two hats that I think we wear.
Man, I've got those two hats. I'm with you. And no matter how much, look, I have mostly disdain for all the people that are president. So it doesn't matter what party it is. But if Joe called me right now and said, Pete, I need you, guess what? I'm going to grab my bag and go because I'm a dummy. I'll do it. If Donald Trump called me and said, Pete, I need you, guess what? I'd go. If Hillary Clinton called, if I would go because you know what? I'm good at this. And if someone's going to go, it makes me someone who's
that's the whole point.
And go and do whatever the work is.
I mean, so that's who you want to send. And so, by the way, one of the things that I think we may have talked about before is I like problems that are hard. I don't want easy. That's a tough one. That is so screwed up. Let's go. We'll figure it out. That's the kind of stuff that we get off. I'm being serious. I mean, so you're right. Problem, I remember we were up in northern Iraq. I went up there. It was a joint agency 10th group team. It was called the Nile teams, the Northern Iraq Liaison Element. This is December of 2002. So we're living up in northern Iraq before the invasion. And we get there, early on, and everything went wrong in the infill. Our weapons didn't show up, so we go to the Kurds, embarrassing. Like, can we borrow some weapons? That's a little humiliating. And then our exfil is not existent. Incirlik couldn't reach us, so we're like, hey, we'll just walk to Iran. I mean, those are the things you come up with. And there's a little trickle of hot water. We're cold as shit. The first thing we do, of course, is I go to the Kurds and I get them to supply us with Amstel beer. We have beer. But those are the times as an intelligence officer where it's fun. Everything is screwed up. Nothing is going right. We'll figure it out, and we did. And so that's that's what I miss in these kind of crazy, intractable conflicts. Being there.
Yeah, I have a very similar story. It's not quite as large scale, but there we were, northern Iraq, and some people come up to us and said, "We don't have the capacity to go and answer this question." And there's another question, and probably a third question, if you're going to go. Can you guys legally go? And we go, if the commander asks us to go, we can, there's a question, so they're like, well, we're not going to tell anybody if you go, but if you bring something back, that'd be good for us, information wise. And so we checked around and nobody had a problem with us going and nobody else could go. And so it was like, well, here we go, and we went. and I'm being very vague because I still don't know if it was legal, but it had to get done. And when we did it, we answered questions and actually deflated some of the concern and ended up that being right. So I get exactly what you're saying. We've done these things.
Yeah. I mean, I miss being in the mix. That is for sure. Every once in a while, my poor wife, I'm like, I got to go to Ukraine, or I got to go to Tel Aviv just to check things out. So
just check things out. So, okay, let's real quick get into Ukraine, Russia, because that thing is advancing. Sweden is now part of NATO. And, I don't know what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen. This is what Pete thinks is going to happen. Then you can talk all you want about this. Sometime before the election is going to be a big push by our boss to talk to the boss over in Russia and say, how do we resolve this thing? And they'll try to stick the landing in October. Surprise, war is over. And good or bad and ugly, I think that's what happens. But I don't know. What do you think? I mean, this thing's been a boondoggle. It's been expensive. It's a lot of people are not into it in the United States. What are your thoughts?
So I'm actually a huge supporter of our assistance program to Ukraine. I think it's probably the greatest effort in terms of something like this we've done in half a century. The Ukrainians resisted Russian aggression because the U.S. came to their aid. This is a true David versus Goliath story. I think it's something that, with all the kind of the gray, the fuzziness, and the GY, all of a sudden this is a story of helping a country that was that suffered terribly in terms of invasion by Russia. And so, cool. I would like us to see, I've always said I'd like us to see more. I think it's money very well spent. We've managed to, with a tiny percentage and no U.S. boots on the ground, very small investment of money, we've managed to attrit half the Russian military, kill 300,000 to 350,000 and injure, help the Ukrainians kill and injure 350,000 Russians. And all of a sudden now our transatlantic alliance is now reinvigorated. Again, as you said, today is the day that Sweden has now joined. And by the way, that's a really big deal. The Sweden defense industry is massively impressive. And so, the problem though is with, I think, political dysfunction in the United States, and it's not. I think there's generally bipartisan support in the House and the Senate for an aid package, but you have the Republican candidate and Donald Trump, forcing Speaker Johnson not to take this deal, this kind of border / aid deal, and Ukrainians are going to die because of it. And I think it's an enormous hit the United States is going to take internationally. We stood by our Ukrainian allies. I wish we had done even more. But I think if we walk away, that's going to be a credibility hit that is stunning. I'm hoping something gets done with the aid package. I think it will, because, most of kind of the national security minded Republicans in the House, chairman of the Intel committees and the Armed Services committees and Foreign Affairs Republicans are in favor of the aid package. But it's something that Speaker Johnson and former President Trump and kind of the hard right is not. They're in the minority, but they're in a very strange way. Ordinarily, foreign policy is usually Congress has no effect on. In this case, it does, because it has a price tag. But I think it's money very well spent, and I really, Ukrainians are going to die. I don't think there's going to be any kind of settlement that you noted in October. I think, if anything, Putin's just waiting out the election, and we'll see what happens after that. But we've got to get more aid to the Ukrainians. The Europeans are stepping up. By 2025, they've actually committed the exact same amount of aid, but we're just in a race against time now in terms of the Ukrainians literally running out of air defense and ammunition. And I think there's going to be that can be catastrophic. If we get this aid package done, though, stuff can flow immediately, and so it's a race against time. That's my 50,000 foot look at the situation.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, that's good. And I've also run a lot lower on dudes, because as much as we've whacked or helped to whack a bunch of Russians, there's a whole bunch of dead Ukrainians or Ukrainians that are like, I'm out of here, and they don't want to fight.
No, there are. You're right. There's a huge issue with military service in Ukraine. A lot of young Ukrainians are not serving, and so if you look at internal Ukrainian politics, I think there is a need for more bodies, frankly. That's a huge issue.
Yeah. And just in case war is hard, and you try to you pick something, and then the war dragon turns on you and it chews you up, and you're like, damn, we thought that was the right thing. That happens all the time. So war for sure is hard. And in this case with President Trump, I don't want to see people dying, and so if we could turn this thing off, that'd be great. It isn't that simple, and war isn't that gentle, and so we have to wait and see what happens.
Right.
Whether we're kicking in money or people or not, it's fucking shitty. The over-under I'm going to give you for the Red Sox this year is 85 wins.
Oh, my God.
What are you taking?
The news on Giolito getting hurt out for the year is devastating. I don't understand how the Boston Red Sox, who charge exorbitant ticket prices, it costs $35 to get a damn, lobster roll at Fenway, are now acting like a mid-market team, spending no money on anybody. So but it's still preseason, it's spring training, and so they still haven't won or lost a game. Hope is eternal. There's some free agents out there, but no, I think they're going to suck. But I will be going. I arranged. I have a speaking engagement. Boston University called me up and said, "Hey, can you come up and give a talk anytime you want?" And of course, I arranged it to be the day before opening day. So I'll go up, give the talk, and then go to opening day.
I love baseball. I can talk about most of the teams pretty intelligently, but I've been talking with I grew up in the Oakland area, and so I've been talking with my Oakland A's fans. And man, the one thing I got to say about us Oakland fans is we don't show up like Red Sox fans. We don't show up like Cubs fans. And the second the team isn't winning, they disappear. And then they just get madder and madder at the owner, but they don't understand what a modern ballpark costs to go to. Like, if you and I go to a Red Sox game, we're probably, if we buy any kind of good seats at all, we're both looking at $200 a head. By the time you have a couple of beers and some food each. Each.
Easy. Yeah.
Right.
But if you're wearing your Dodgers hat, I will say that one thing is that I'm convinced now that the Red Sox stink because they're cursed with the Mookie Betts trade. The Mookie Betts trade. So Mookie is one of the best players on the planet, but the Mookie Betts trade to the Dodgers, that's the curse. And I think probably by the year 2030 we might break it. Yeah.
Well, here I got a good one for you, and this hasn't worked out. I've told Yankees fans this, but this is 100% true. So last year I was at the Dodger game, and that's with my friend Phil. It was ALS day, and Phil and his family were going to throw out the first pitch. Phil has ALS. And before the game, he went down into the Yankees because the Yankees were playing the Dodgers on ALS day. It's perfect in LA. And so he goes down to the into the Yankees dugout tunnel, and he's talking to Aaron Judge. And Aaron says, "Phil, I'm going to hit you 2 home runs today." Oh. Aaron Judge does not hit 2 home runs that day. You know who does? Your man Mookie. And then the next day, guess what happens to Aaron Judge? Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth's ghost collected his toe and said, "No, sir, you have to hit your home runs on ALS day." And so there you go. Like, baseball's funny like that when these things happen. And, if there is a sport that has gods, it's for sure baseball.
Oh, totally.
It's for sure baseball. Yeah.
100%. Oh, yeah. And it's it always, there's a lot of karma involved. But yeah, you're right. And I will say that watching the Dodgers this year, there's a couple teams. I love baseball, and I'll watch every Red Sox game. But I don't know if the Indians are on, I'm not going to watch a game. The Dodgers are a team that you would watch. If they would pop up on MLB channel, like, I'll watch them. And the star power of that team is staggering right now. Yeah. That's going to be fun. Now, the only problem is that it doesn't guarantee a World Series title, as you know.
Nope. So. No, it's super luck driven. The other thing I'll say about the Dodgers and the Astros, maybe a little bit the Rays, but they're a little bit too small. And I don't know if this is true of the Red Sox anymore, but the money they spend on the off the field competition, the big brains that help them make great decisions.
Oh yeah.
Boy, the Dodgers are great at that. You see them making moves and doing things. So I'll let you comment on that, but also I want to say Joey Votto is available. Zach Greinke is available. There's a lot of good players out there still waiting for jobs.
And Montgomery, you got Montgomery, Blake Snell.
Oh, Montgomery, right. Yeah.
Montgomery and Snell are still out there. But Joey Votto, that tweet he sent out 2 days ago where he's just sitting alone, saying,
I want to get him a job.
I love that guy just for that. Yeah. But baseball is a magic sport as well. And look, I don't know if I told you about this last time. Maybe I don't know if when I did this podcast, the Spy Museum in DC called me and they said, "Do you want to do a podcast on baseball and counterintelligence? And we'll have Ryan Zimmerman come on." And I was like, "Yeah, hell yeah."
Yes.
So I did a podcast with Ryan Zimmerman, and it was it was only about counterintelligence practices that sports teams use, and he talked about the Astros. And kind of what the Nats would do. The Nats knew the Astros were cheaters, and that was totally cool. And so, there's parallels between our old business and intelligence and baseball. And it's also the notion of, again, what we used to do on operations. Like, you fail a lot. Baseball, you fail 7 out of 10 times, you make the All-Star team. Well, it's different. I mean, overturning rocks in terms of looking for people to recruit, it's probably, your success rate is probably 1 out of 100 people you meet. So you got to learn how to deal with, mentally how to deal with, it's not failure, but how to deal with failing, and kind of to keep going. But I'm excited. Baseball's around the corner. I will go to Red Sox opening day. I think I might go to Nats opening day as well. You're kind of a de facto Nats fan, but they're so bad.
But they've won a title in the last, 5 years. So you can't complain, right? Like you got 10 years of no complaining at least, so.
And then they all went to Philly. Everybody. Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, they all went to Philly. So they're all up north.
Yeah, and those guys, that's hard to remember. Everybody's talking about how great Philly was last year. No, they didn't win a title. They didn't even go, So one more thing I want to ask you about real quick. So we talk about intelligence in baseball. People like to talk about Mo Berg. And I was talking to a guy the other day, I think on X. And I'm like, look, Mo Berg is nice. Yeah, he contributed, and that is wonderful. But he is not, you can't show up and just be a guy that is smart and reads books and be good at this job. You might get lucky, but his contribution, and when he goes back to the CIA or the OSS, whatever it was at that time, and says, I want a job. And they're like, yeah, that's nice. Get out of here. Because you don't get to walk in and do this. Like you have to be, to get to your level, to get to my level, the small moves. We've made the big mistakes, and I don't think people understand that. So really quick, talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to let you go.
It's so much is based on experience. You're right. This is not a job you kind of just walk into. And so, ultimately, I became finally comfortable as an operations officer, and I loved the job. But when I'd been through so much, so I've had agents who died tragically, agents who've gone bad, agents who have produced intelligence that went in the president's daily brief. I had bosses who were jerks, bosses who were great, ambassadors who were terrible. I had colleagues who were spying for the Russians and who were arrested and went to jail for 30 years. So collectively, all these experiences, I would wake up every day and say, something's going to happen today. Could be good, could be bad, but ultimately, I know I will be able to deal with it because I've done that before. And I think that goes to the notion you were talking about. Experience really does, matter. And that's why this is not a job where, like in the tech world where you can have a 25-year-old CEO. You just can't. Station chiefs are older because you got to go through lots of experiences and deal with lots of different things. So when something happens, you know how to deal with it.
Yeah. When that sure thing evaporates in front of your face and it turns into something horrible, you got to be able to go, all right, I'll get back out tomorrow and go do it. Like you can't. Yeah. Well, listen, anything you want to say in closing before I wrap this thing up?
No, this is great. I mean, this something like this is awesome because I just feel like I'm, talking to a colleague, which I am, just kind of shooting the shit. And by the way, this is what we do, so this conversation we had right now is the same thing if I'm hanging out at a local bar with my friends who are retired from the agency as well. Shoot the shit. But mostly I will say that especially with my friends who served in the Middle East and South Asia, it always kind of translates into like the worst gastrointestinal illnesses you ever had or some kind of disgusting thing like that. It always comes to that. It's not tales of heroism. It's like, hey, remember when I was, down with an IV in Cairo or something like that, or in Delhi? The stories from India are epic, I must say. And that's the kind of stuff I love.
I love it. All right, let me run these credits and I'll come back and say bye.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.